take a minute and take kind of a little tour through different types of media. We'll start with print media, which was the first important type of mass media in American history and world history probably. Typically we're talking about newspapers and magazines here. The first American daily newspaper wasn't printed until 1783 in Philadelphia. But daily newspapers didn't become common, didn't become a regular thing until the middle of the 19th century due to the development of the penny press, which was just a cheaper paper and a cheaper cylinder press that basically made it cost less to print a newspaper, and then they could sell them for a penny. Probably the biggest development in newspapers, maybe of all time, is the telegraph. Now, you know, Samuel Morse invented the telegraph in the 1840s. But it mattered to newspapers because it allowed newspapers to gather information from all over the country and fairly quickly all over the world. And so you could go down and buy your New York newspaper or your San Francisco newspaper or your Austin newspaper, and you could read about things that happened anywhere, really by the 1870s or so, anywhere in the whole world, and by the 1840s, anywhere in America, that it happened the day before, whereas before you might be weeks or even months before you got any news outside of your local area. The wire service formed into the Associated Press, which is basically a bunch of different newspapers who agreed to send each other stories over the telegraph wire. And the Associated Press is still probably the top name in print journalism today. If you go pick up your local newspaper wherever you are, it uses one of the news services, the Associated Press, Reuters, McClatchy, are very likely the Associated Press, since it's still the biggest of those. Yellow journalism is a sensational style of reporting that really came about at the turn of the century. And what was going on here is most markets at this point began to have many newspapers. So in New York, there might be 12 different daily newspapers. In a place like Boston, there might be like 8. And so people would go to the newsstand and they would look and they would try to decide which newspaper to buy. And the newspapers would compete for buyers by putting really sensational, fantastic, exciting news on the front page. And a lot of times it was exaggerated, or sometimes it was kind of just made up. But the competition was fierce. For example, one newspaper paid 2 celebrities to get married just so they could cover the wedding. And of course, today you might think of Kim Kardashian, who seemed to get married just for media coverage. There's also the great story of the Spanish-American War, where the tension is rising between America and Spain and Cuba. And William Randolph Hearst sends an artist down to draw pictures of the war. That is Frederick Remington. And Frederick Remington gets to Cuba, and there is no war. There's no fighting going on. And so he sends a telegram back to Hearst that says, "Have arrived in Cuba, there is no war." And Hearst sends him back a telegram that says, "You provide the pictures, I'll provide the war." And many historians today believe that the Spanish-American War, one of its primary causes, was to sell newspapers, that it was a media-inspired war. Anyway, this is yellow journalism. The 2 key figures here are Hearst, who I've mentioned, and Joseph Pulitzer, who would sensationalize violence, corruption, war, and gossip to try to compete to sell the most newspapers with each other. Now, you might ask today, is this still yellow journalism? I don't know. Look at your news sources. Do you see violent sensationalism and gossip all over the front page or the splash page on your news site, or when you go to check your email? We talk about yellow journalism as something in the past, but I'm not so convinced. I don't think the era of yellow journalism is over. The New York Times is considered the paper of record for America. It is the most prestigious paper in the United States. And then there are some others who are also highly regarded. The Washington Post is a fantastic paper that's widely regarded by many. The Chicago Tribune, the Los Angeles Times. And down here in the southwest region where we live, the Dallas Morning News is probably considered to be the premier paper in this part of the country. Newspapers and magazines, circulation has dramatically declined. In fact, there are major newspapers in this country who no longer have a print edition. The Seattle Post-Intelligencer, for example, became the first newspaper in the country to just completely do away with actually printing a newspaper, and everything is online. Newspapers are dying. I know we have students who work on the newspaper here. I hope you're getting your web publishing skills honed, because newspapers are just ceasing to exist. Older people still tend to read them, but as you probably know, younger people prefer to pick up a tablet or surf the internet on their phone or something and get the news that way. And so newspapers, while they have been incredibly important in the history of our country, are no longer particularly important. I should also mention magazines. The political content of leading magazines is pretty slim. Magazines like Time, Newsweek, and U.S. News and World Report rank well behind things like Reader's Digest, National Geographic, TV Guide, People, the National Enquirer, things like this. Serious magazines of political news and opinions like the New Republic, the National Review, and Commentary, Mother Jones, are really only read by a very small number of people, maybe just a few thousand really, even though they can be very influential because those few thousand people tend to be newsmakers and reporters and things like that. But magazines, again, are being simply replaced by the internet.